Hi, I'm Justin Kramer. I work at ProShip. I'm one of the co-founders of the shipping software here. I'm a little loud. If we can turn me down, I have a tendency to be loud, so I don't want to deafen anybody. I know it's first thing in the morning on a Sunday morning. I want to thank everybody for coming out, traveling early. I know this show used to start much later in the day, things of that nature. So I appreciate the fact that everybody's come out to actually see us this morning. As the slide says, I am the Global Project Management Director, which basically means I get an opportunity to work with a lot of our customers around the globe. And in this case today, we want to talk so much about that strategic planning. And my partner up here today, Adam.
Hi, Adam Klein. I am the Senior Director of Product Management at Manhattan Associates. So I look after our warehouse management strategy and roadmap. If you're not familiar with Manhattan, I'd invite you to come by and stop by the booth. We'll tell you who we are, but we're basically into omni-channel fulfillment, warehouse management, anything to do with supply chain planning and execution, as well as inventory optimization, demand forecasting. We have about 25 products we go to market with. This is not a commercial for Manhattan Associates, but I would be thrilled to chat with you after the session. My experience in the warehouse management domain goes back about 21 years, all with Manhattan. Back from a small company to what we've become today. So thank you for the opportunity to come and speak with you, Justin. Looking forward to talking a little bit about peak season today.
Yeah, should be fun. So just to get everybody's mind in order. So when we talk about the enterprise software stack, you have ERPs, you have warehouse management systems, you have shipping solutions, you have your e-commerce components. All these various things have to come together in order for you to execute properly in a peak season. So we're just talking about two of the major components within that enterprise architecture stack, but understand that there is so much more associated with it. In Manhattan's case, they service many pieces of that stack, right? In ProShip's case, we're very, very focused on that shipment execution and that customer experience on honoring that customer experience that you've sold them. So we want to talk today about how every year, hopefully, you're improving that customer experience. You're improving your employee experience. You're making sure that every year you're able to do more, and you're able to do that in a sustainable fashion within your employee set. So it really is cyclical, right? So we've given this speech a couple of times. Why? Because it doesn't stop. Okay, this is something that every year you're going to be working on. One of the things that we're going to keep harkening back to is a concept that many companies have, like a 3-year plan. Right? You're obviously not going to execute that entire 3-year plan in your first year, but you want to make sure you understand that 3-year plan so that as you make decisions this year and the following year and the following year, and every few years that 3-year plan gets updated, that you're continuing to move towards where you want to go. Okay? So a lot of that is really going to come down to the methodology itself. Okay, so it's pretty cyclical. It's pretty straightforward. Understand what we've got up on the screen right now is a common mid to large size schedule. Okay, it's also for a retailer. You may not be a retailer. Your customers may not be retailers. Okay, you may not have a peak season in December. Okay, this can obviously be slid and moved around as necessary. Okay, it can be shortened or expanded. Again, realistically, there's a much larger plan over top of this that may go 3, 5, or if you're a very, very large company, 10 years out. So this is just one piece. This is the phase of immediate execution for this year.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what's key to note is that here we are in January, right? So the cycle for retailers is just now starting for this upcoming year, right? So we're in the post-peak follow-up. So this is our opportunity to learn about what just happened, right? So I think this is a great time to be talking about peak season planning because we're right at the forefront of this process. The cycle just started over, right? So that's what we'll start to talk about here is this post-peak follow-up session that we're in right now in January. Again, given your business, it might be slightly different. The calendar might be offset a little bit, but the key is if you're not having this meeting, if it's not on the calendar, it needs to get on the calendar right away because we got to start the process.
Exactly. And there's an individual, a responsibility that hopefully was assigned before peak. and that is the recorder. Somebody that during the peak process has been sitting there, not only recording the little things that went wrong. Obviously, we're all going to remember the big things that went wrong, right? That's going to be top on our mind, right? But we don't want to let that distract us, okay? Because there's so much more to execution than just that one big thing. Obviously, we have to solve that, right? But there's also all the little things that kind of went right or kind of went wrong. There's also many things that went very right, right? And if you're not recording those, if you're not looking at both sides of the equation, odds are you're going to have a risk of making a decision that will that might remove those things that went well because you didn't talk about them. So one of my reoccurring themes as we go through this is the documentation person. Okay, now depending upon the size of your company, that might be one person, right? We all get that to that one individual. Shoot them an email, send them a text when something went well or went wrong, so that you've got that central point. Or it might be somebody within a department. So you might have multiples if you're a $100 million shipper or something like that. Okay. So, but getting back to it, we really want to make sure that we're looking at both those successes and those opportunities, but also we need to have a meeting before strategic planning. I know everybody hates to talk about the meeting before the meeting, right? But this meeting isn't just about strategic planning. It's about truly understanding how your peak went, okay? And if nobody recorded that information, you're simply going off your gut, right? And though many of us are very good, we've spent a lot of years in our industry and we remember a lot, it's always better if something has been written down. So when you're sitting in that room and you're going, well, how did operations go in the warehouse? How did the e-commerce suite? Did we get the throughput that we were looking for? Did we get any comments? Did customer service have some communication back to us that said during peak they really enjoyed the chat or they really enjoyed the tracking component of the e-commerce suite? All of these things that you want to make sure that we actually don't just focus on those negatives. Don't just focus on the opportunities for change, but focus on the successes that we've had as well. And if that meeting isn't scheduled within your organization now, somebody should be scheduling it. Right? Because you want to have time for that information to settle in, to be communicated to the stakeholders, to be communicated to the departments, to make sure that they're behind and they agree with everything that you've come up with. Okay. All right, let's move into the big part. Okay. Now everybody thinks about strategic planning. Strategic planning is what we all think peak planning is about, right? Well, it's in the name, peak planning. But in reality, we know there are many, many other phases that we want to be looking at. So we're going to have a couple slides here on strategic planning because it is so important. It's so important because we want to align everybody within the organization and we want to ensure that everybody understands the goal, right? Whether it's a person down in the warehouse, a call center individual, the other VPs, whoever it might be, we want to make sure everybody is pulling in the same direction. That's why we have the 3-year plan and the 1-year plan, right? So the first thing we want to do is talk about those people. Who are we gathering together? Who are the stakeholders? Who are the internal requirements? And then, of course, there's people like us. There's the vendors. Okay, you want to be able to pull us all together as well. We need to understand where you're going because along with this, there's a great opportunity for us to tell you where our customers are going, what we see in the industry, and be able to advise you as part of that.
Yeah, and I just had a recent opportunity to sit down with our Vice President of Customer Support, and we do a couple of things to help with peak season planning. Number one, we do kind of on-site assessments where we'll send a team to kind of help with this process and help you, kind of implement this process. But we just got out of quite a few of these post-peak planning sessions, and a few of the themes that emerged, really 3 main themes. One was the fact that the store network is being leveraged, to a much greater degree today. And during this last peak, we had a sporting goods retailer that was shipping about 60% of their volumes during peak out of their stores rather than their distribution centers. So we're seeing a huge shift over to delivery from stores. We also have seen labor, the onboarding of temp labor as a major challenge. So there's various ways of trying to address that. And those are conversations that we're having with our customers. And then the third is kind of back to the store network, very, very related to that, is leveraging stores as a contingency. So what happens when there's a major snowstorm that hits and kind of cripples a portion of your distribution network? How do you reroute and still maintain the SLAs for your customers? How can you do that effectively?
So once you've got those participants, now you've obviously started to gather the information, and you really want to be able to determine where you want to improve to determine what you want to gather, right? So there's always continued omni-channel enablement. Now this is extremely important. We all understand in the industry our customers are expecting free 2-day delivery. Okay. Well, if you only have one warehouse, and let's say it's in Nevada or it's in Hebron, Kentucky, or something of that nature, it becomes very difficult to meet a 2-day commitment time with your customers across the entire country, okay, let alone when we start looking at global commerce. Okay? But if we look at the fact that we have multiple sets of internal inventory, stores, warehouses, and DCs, right, and we have multiple sets of external inventory, 3PLs, and maybe manufacturers, especially if we're a retailer, we have relationships with our manufacturers or with other distributors. They can ship on our behalf. Okay? So we want to make sure that we know all these places where we can ship from. Why? Because that directly affects the cost of meeting a particular delivery window for our customer, which means that even if the cost of goods shipped, even if the cost of the good itself, the labor, things of that nature cost a little bit more, if it drops our shipping costs by 50% to do that and still meet that customer expectation, that becomes extremely powerful, because then your total cost to meet that customer commitment drops overall, right? So just some things to look at. Some of that can be done with automation. Obviously, we want the fact that we sell software, the whole purpose of that is to automate business rules, obviously. Okay? There's also mechanical automation out there as well that allows you to do more with fewer people. This means less temp workers, less opportunity for mistakes, and of course, as we go through some of the testing, you can actually see how much you can ship in a certain amount of time. Labor shortages, I'm hearing it across the country right now. I'm even starting to hear it in other countries as well, that it is becoming more and more difficult to staff up for peak. It's sometimes even becoming difficult to staff up for non-peak, to get those seasoned workers that we want, that are going to be the backbone of our peak execution.
Yeah, in fact, Justin, we've learned that over the past couple of years, the number of qualified candidates for warehousing jobs specifically has drastically reduced. In fact, so much so that that the occurrences of hiring workers with criminal backgrounds, criminal records, has gone up by about 35%. So warehouses are getting a little desperate, so to speak, right? You could look at the positives and the negatives, I guess, of that, but clearly, when you're changing your hiring patterns, in a drastic way to deal with the labor shortage, there's something that needs to be addressed there, and there's a lot of ways, right? You mentioned automation, robotics, right? The other thing around labor, and especially when you think about temp labor in this type of environment, you don't know if those folks are going to be around the next day. So how much time do you want to spend training and onboarding them, right? You want it to be very quick, but you want to get them to a level of productivity very, very rapidly. So that speaks to some of the planning for training those associates in a rapid way, but also from a systems perspective. You need to make sure that you've got the right systems on board to allow them to become effective very, very quickly.
Yep. All right. So the next thing we want to look at is what are we going to correct? What are we going to optimize? Okay. So obviously, if you have any instability within your enterprise software stack, that's got to be corrected. Because those instabilities, just like in a mechanical world, if you have a tire that wobbles at a certain speed, if you try to go faster, it's only going to get worse, right? So we want to, first things first, make sure that any weaknesses that was found in the systems last peak, we're solving those, okay? We want to understand, again, we see so much of that omni-channel inventory being increased, being looked at, partnerships happening, things of this nature. Why? Because it helps to drive down the costs, okay? Then, of course, we have to communicate well with our partners, things of that nature, but that becomes really, really important that we understand where everything is coming from and that we have the rest of our enterprise software stack informed of that, okay? Because if the other systems don't know, they can't actually select that as an origin point in order to satisfy your customer's needs. Okay. The next one we're going to go into is strategic planning. And here is where decisions are made. Okay, and it's probably the most important thing, in my opinion, as a vendor, is that decisions are clear and decisions are concise, right? So we know this allows us as your vendors to say, this is how long we're going to take to actually implement this decision, okay? This is how long it's going to take, when we can get it on the calendar. This is how much it's going to cost. And of course, we are expecting this last bullet point here, a clear set of results, right? We want to know what you consider success, okay? So we can try to exceed that. So it's really important that as a manufacturer, as a distributor, as a retailer, or anybody involved in shipment execution, that your vendors understand when you're going to be happy, okay? So that's extremely important.
Yeah, and if you look at this, I mean, you look at some of the tenets of this portion of the cycle, I mean, this is really project management 101, right? I mean, when we start to think about, kind of the evaluation of the effort and how long is this going to take, and you have to start thinking about prioritizing and ultimately, deciding, hey, what are the things that I can actually take on? Justin mentioned, you may have a multi-year plan, to address some of the labor shortages, for example, right? Well, robotics may be part of that, right? Additional mechanization may be part of that, but that may not happen in year one, right? So you may deal with some additional training and some other things on year one, and then as you have budget and time and other resources to go and implement some of those maybe longer term pieces of strategy, those may get pushed below the line this year, but then picked up again for evaluation the following year. So it's really important to kind of prioritize and then ultimately determine what are you going to address this year. Commit to it and do it, right? And that's the key, right? Because as you go through the process, those recorders that Justin mentioned a little while ago, they're going to be taking notes all through the rest of this process, and then we're going to be evaluating and ultimately grading ourselves on how we did, and then did we actually do what we said we were going to do.
And Adam, you remind me of something. That 3-year plan, or that 5-year plan, or whatever your long-term plan is, it's very important to ensure that your expected results reflect where you're going to go, and that those are communicated to your vendors. Because at this point in time, there are many decisions that your vendors are making. What we're going to communicate, what technologies we're going to use, if we are going to optimize for this year's expected results or not. Okay. Because if we know where we're going, we may make decisions that allow next year's strategic planning, the effort, scope, and budget to be smaller, because we've set a couple of things up right that we don't have to undo next year, right? So that's extremely important. The last two on here, I keep saying so many things are extremely important, I'm sorry, but they really are. There are so many things there are so many keys here, so many steps down the road that if they're taken properly in the planning phase, is going to make the rest of this so much easier. Prioritization, and then selecting what's actually going to get done and committing to it, okay? That commitment is extremely important. And when we say commit, we're looking for the stakeholders, we're looking for the CEO, we're looking for everybody in the company to agree. This is what we want everybody to do, right? Because as soon as we understand what this is, what the actual goal is, then as a group, right, we can go ahead and say, this is what we can do, this is what we can't do. When we run into problems as we go forward, as we actually move into the execution phase, and we find areas where it's going to be difficult, it makes it a lot easier as a group to then determine, can we do this? Should we do this? Can this be pushed off? Or are we exceeding our expectations? Can we get a little bit more of that 3-year plan in here because it's easier to do at this point in time when all the engineers have it fresh in their brain, when the stakeholders are all giving us great communication, right? That's a lot different than if somebody's like, well, we're hoping to get this done, right? And if we just give a huge laundry list of things with no real direction, with no real decision, what's going to happen? We're going to get parts of it, okay? And it's not going to be clear, it's not going to be concise, you're going to have trouble communicating value to your customer.
And it may be the wrong parts, right?
Maybe the wrong parts,
yeah.
Exactly.
And I would say one more thing is that, when you think about the commitment side of it, as we noted at the beginning, Justin and I as vendors, right, we've got to be part of that commitment process as well, right? So you need to get the buy-in, the commitment from your key from your key supporters, from a systems perspective, to make sure that that process goes flawlessly. Because if there's an upgrade that's part of this whole process, and there's a go live date that everything else is contingent on, or maybe there's some new services that are being brought on, all that needs to be built into the schedule as well. And you need commitments from your vendors that are helping you through that process, so that it doesn't delay everything else.
So as we go through and start executing, you're going through and starting executing, there's internal, external teams. There's a lot of communication that goes on. Okay, we want to make sure that communication, that those stakeholders, the ones who made those decisions earlier, who know why they made those decisions, that they're still available. So if things if we do come across an opportunity or a concern that we have, that there's a method of communicating up through the project management team to those individuals to get feedback, to help ensure that we truly understand the plan. Okay, that when there's a problem, let's say the ERP solution or the e-commerce solution came out with a new change. Okay, you want to put it in place, but there's a material difference between the system that you had when you did your planning versus the system you're going to have at execution. Okay, that's actually going to change the way all of the vendors execute. So hopefully we've got some contingency in here and great communication processes to allow that information to be fed down. Now, as vendors, we're going to go ahead, we're going to bring that in, we're going to evaluate, we're going to say this is how it's going to affect us and our timeline. Okay, we're going to work with you and say, okay, so we have one of two choices. Okay, I guess we have three, right? We can go ahead and say, yep, we can do this. It still fits within our timeline, but we're going to have to up the budget. We may have to add personnel to meet a timeline because of this material change, okay? Or we may have to reduce features that we're going to deliver, okay? Some of those are not results that our upper management want. That's where the communication becomes really important, okay? And that's where those project management teams become really important to keep that open communication channel. Okay, and of course down here we've got include weeks of contingency in your project plan. Now obviously, depending upon the size of your company, we're talking a mid to large size retailer here. Those weeks of contingency, we see them get used over and over again because of those cascading dependencies that we see coming from one part of the enterprise software stack and pushing across or pushing down or up and affecting all the others.
Yeah, an example there. A few years ago, we had a fairly major retailer. I'm sure most of you have shopped at in the past. A clearly unexpected event occurred about mid-year, and one of their major distribution centers actually caught on fire, burned to the ground, right? And there was a huge hub of distribution for them. So we helped them build a pop-up warehouse, and get things running again. And thankfully, they did build in contingency into their peak season planning because we were able to help them ultimately execute a flawless peak season that year, which was pretty surprising after such a disastrous event. Now, hopefully, nothing like that happens to any of you, but you really just never know what's gonna happen, whether it's a storm, a fire, any other disruption to your network. We need to plan for that.
Yeah, and now we're not saying plan for a warehouse to burn down. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is if you put in contingency, if you understand that things that we can't plan for are going to happen, you're going to be in a much better position to actually react to those changes. Okay, validation. So now we've got everything in place, right? So as vendors, we're like, whew, all right, we've got everything out there for you. Now let's start training your people. This is a great time, by the way, especially if you're using temp workers. Prepare the plan to train the temp workers. If you can even get an opportunity to bring a temp worker in, train them, or as you're bringing on new permanent staff, train them as that temp worker to get a feel as to how your training plan works. That's great, that's important, right? Once we've got everything in place though, we want to do some testing. We want to simulate peak. Now when we do volume performance testing or VPT, in this case, we're not in a production system. We're simulating in a QA, in a pre-prod, in a whatever your company calls that level just before production. Okay, this is our last opportunity to truly stress the system out. But of course, we know it's fake data, right? You may be running last year's data. You may be you may be auto-generating tons of data, but it's still not real world. Okay, so this is where surge testing and compression testing comes in. Throughout the year, there are generally small peaks, right? Maybe it's Mother's Day, maybe it's Valentine's Day, something of that nature, Labor Day or Memorial Day. This gives you an opportunity to say, what we're going to do is we're going to bring everybody in, normal time. We're going to pause for 2 hours. We're going to give training. We're going to do all these other things. Meanwhile, all those orders are building up, right? And so we're going to then spend the next 4 hours. Again, I'm making up numbers here, so adjust to the way your company works best. But we're going to spend the next 4 hours working as if it was Black Friday, okay? And so we're going to try to bring everything up. We're going to run everything and see if we can remove that backlog in that short amount of time. All right, because we're going to be operating at peak season speeds because we did that artificial compression of those components, right? And so this allows you to test what happens if a machine breaks down, what happens if somewhere in the queue, somewhere within that enterprise software stack, one of those systems stops or isn't able to handle the volume, something of that nature. It's a lot easier to deal with that on Memorial Day than it is to deal with that on Thanksgiving. All right, so now we've done all this. It's right before peak. We want to go into readiness, okay? So hopefully right now you have your disaster recovery plans. Talk through them, okay? Make sure they're written down. Know who's going to execute what. Now, a lot of people are like, well, of course, Sam's going to do that. Well, is Sam going to be on vacation over Thanksgiving? Is there somebody other than Sam that can actually take that role on? What happens if it's 3 o'clock in the morning the Sunday after Thanksgiving? Who's going to do it then? All right? You want to make sure you know who's going to do what when, and you have all of your peak covered in the event of PTO, in the event of sickness, in the event of anything that might remove that primary person. Okay? Your tech audits, this is where we as vendors, we come in and we say, all right, so yep, you've got everything set up the way we expect. You should be able to achieve this throughput with your system. You should be able to handle these contingencies, okay? This is also where your internal teams, your IT teams, your business teams should also be doing audits, making sure that everything is ready to go, okay? And you need to understand how is your system configured? And we'll pull this one in the next slide here real quick, okay? But how everything is configured is extremely important that be documented so we know how we may have to change it when reality sets in during the peak.
Yeah, and Justin, this is the last time that we really have an opportunity to ensure that all your key stakeholders are aligned, and all, kind of plowing towards the same set of goals. And again, both internal and external stakeholders, right? Again,
Exactly.
It's so important to engage, not just your IT and business folks, those key folks internally, but to make sure, again, that your key vendors are there for you and going to be providing the level of support that you're going to need to get you through that all-important peak season for sure.
All right, so now it's peak season, right? Hopefully we've got a record keeper in place, or record keepers, okay? We know what our system looked like. We have everything documented. We have a change control process because you may have to change something. With a good change control process, everybody gets informed, everybody's aware, the record keeper knows as well, so we know when we reflect this time of the year what happened, and we need rapid responses, right? So hopefully we've got automated systems that are looking to make sure the solution is healthy. We've got expert frontline support, both internal and external. Okay, we've got the specialists, we know who they are because we identified them as part of our disaster recovery process. Who's going to help with what when? Okay, and then often vendors like us, we can go ahead and help you as well. At ProShip, we have many of our large customers where we actually send the right person on site and assist them during peak to make those quick network changes. Those of you who are large shippers know that you can very quickly overload some portions of a carrier's network and may need to change the carrier you're using for particular lanes. Okay, so that's something that you can't take 4 days to do. It's generally something you have an hour or 1 to 4 hours in order to make that change. So you want to have direct access to that. Can you talk a little bit about Ready?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the concept that we have at Manhattan Associates is this concept of ready teams. And these are really, you call them like a SWAT team, so to speak, of, customer support folks that are either, back at headquarters or could be deployed on site, depending on the relationship with the customer. And their whole purpose is to ensure that peak runs smoothly from a systemic perspective, and then really they're there to do anything that's necessary to help the customer get through. But one example to kind of show the power of this is we recently I was talking to one of our customers. It was kind of a brand house, apparel and footwear, and they confided that one of their ready teams called them up one morning and said, "Hey, I just fixed an issue before you knew about it." Right? And he was like, "Well, what happened?" They explained the issue, and he's like, "Okay, well, thanks." Right? It's such a small point in time conversation that has such large ramifications, because what if they hadn't caught it? Right? What if that team wasn't on site? What would have happened? We don't know, right? But what we do know is there were no negative effects from that slight configuration change that was made, and the day went on, and the season went on without a hitch, right? So I think it's really important to have those teams ready and proactively looking out for you.
All right, so this is generally an hour-long topic. Realistically, we could probably take 2 hours to truly cover this in depth. Just a couple of takeaways for you. I'm not going to read through them all because we are at our time limit. If any of you guys have got any question, both of us are in our booths today. We'll be just outside here. I want to thank you all for coming so early on a Sunday morning, and hopefully you learned a little bit, but we would appreciate any of you who have questions. Please come to our booths, ask questions, and we would really love to talk more in depth about this subject. And I understand that there is an app to rate sessions that the NRF would really like you guys to be using. All right, thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.